Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inclusion Catalyst podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, Josh Miller, the founder of Josh Miller Ventures and the co-founder and CEO of Ideas xLab. I am a white androgynous man with long wavy brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a blue and white t-shirt and a silk wearable photos print featuring a panoramic sunrise photo from my 110-mile triple bypass ride in Colorado. In the background, there are blue walls, a white table, gold lamp, and white and brown built-in bookshelves and drawers. So what brings us here today? As a queer changemaker, public speaker, photographer, and explorer, I've long believed that being visible and sharing our stories can shift and enhance people's well-being. With our special guest, Lori Frisher, we'll be delving into the topic of covering, which I define as downplaying, hiding, or filtering parts of ourselves at work, in different social groups, at school, and with family. Through my work and research done by organizations including Deloitte and UCLA Williams Institute, women of color, straight white men, LGBTQ+ folks, and people with disabilities, among others, have all named ways in which they covered parts of themselves and their identities. You can learn more at joshmiller.ventures, where you can also watch a recording of this interview with captions. My goal with these conversations is to help people understand what covering is, its impact, and to think critically about how you can uncover your value across areas of life and the impact you can have in work and beyond, not only for you, but for those around you and for future generations. On the last episode, I talked to Maya Abney of The Soapbox Presents and films including Black Panther. We talked about how many of us are encouraged to code switch or cover who we are from a young age. We talked about our role in imagining and creating change for future generations, the role of accomplices and collaborators in our work, and standing in our no by putting in place boundaries that embody our values. Today, I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Lori Frisher, who I met through our mutual friend, Laura Campbell, here in Denver, Colorado. Lori is a leader, an advocate, an entrepreneur, an athlete, a two-time cancer survivor, and a public speaker who dares to dream beyond her present circumstances to discover what's possible. She was born with severe hearing loss and relies on 2 cochlear implants and lip reading to communicate. Through her company, Ready or Not Media, Lori offers immersive disability empathy trainings, keynotes, and more. So welcome to the podcast, Lori.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited for our conversation as well. I'd love it if you could, before we dive into our conversation today, if you could just give a quick visual description of yourself and your surroundings.
Absolutely. I am a Caucasian redhead wearing brown glasses and a little shade of lipstick and shoulder-length hair. In the background, I have a couple of pieces of art behind me with sparkles, and the colors are charcoal grays, and some photographs of pictures of my family behind me, along with some art pieces, and a white background as far as the wall color. And that's it. So happy to be here.
I love seeing all the different elements of art in each person's background. It gives you a little bit of insight into their environment and who they are as people. So thank you for sharing that. As we delve into our conversation, I was wondering if I shared a little bit about you in the intro, but I was wondering if you could talk about the work that you're currently doing and some of the elements of your lived experience that brought you to the work that you're currently doing and what you're building toward with Ready or Not Media.
It is an honor to be part of the segments of what you are trying to get out to the world. And I have been really blessed to have challenges in my life. And, most people would say, how can you be blessed for the challenges you've had and had to overcome? And I think, for me, it's always been, how do I use what I have been gifted in my life to further better those around me in my work and in my personal life. When I unfortunately, through the pandemic, I had faced a lot of different health challenges, Josh, that really opened my world to do the work I do. And I was unfortunately hurdled with access and communication barriers during the pandemic, having hearing loss. I did not have the luxury of being able to lip read and understand those around me because of mask in health environments and hospitality environments, and had my mother live with me for about 3 months. And during that time, I had this epiphany of seeing the lack of access that was around me in those circumstances. And having a background in media and disability in my previous life in New York, I said to myself, you know what, I feel like there's a calling here that I am being called to do. And how can I take the experience that I've had in the past with media to create something that really was about not giving the opportunity for people to say no to. And Radio Not Media was that vision, and it was going to putting people in the situation of having to be immersed and create more empathy around work environments and culture. And I felt that in order for me to do that, I had to use storytelling experiences, and Radio Not Media kind of evolved just based on real life stories, and it's taken a life of its own.
I think the element of stories is one of those things that we really connected around right at the very beginning when we met. And as we look at the impact of the feeling, the need to cover in the workplace, one time my colleague and I were facilitating a workshop, and it was a day-long workshop, about 50 people. And it wasn't until the afternoon that one of the employees said, "Oh, I have a disability, and this is something that I've never shared with you all." And they had been there for almost 4 years. And it really shifted the paradigm of how they could step into that conversation and how they could engage with the leaders. So I just wonder, for you and in your experiences, as you think about the term covering, what feelings does that bring up? And are there specific examples where you may have felt the need to cover in the past for you, and for whatever reasons, cultural, from the environment or otherwise, that manifested?
Yeah, I think, for me, covering has been a big piece of who I am, and watching myself unfold from, my childhood years to my teenage years to my adult years, and now as a business leader in the work I'm doing. I've seen how I've kind of masked my disability and disguised it in ways that I just had to deal with it. And I dealt with it a lot in silence, and I didn't want to have to explain to people, my differences, even though some may have picked up on it just from knowing that I'm sitting in front of a room and need to be in front of the teacher. I, was always missing out by covering. And it was like, it wasn't helping. It was hurting deep down in my soul, that I wasn't sharing it as much as I probably should have. But I was also, putting myself in a position where I overcompensated for my disability for a very long period of time. And, I just felt that there wasn't enough awareness or empathy around me. The only empathy and awareness around me was my family or my teachers. Kids can be cruel, and, you are always trying to hide it, whether it was hiding my hearing aids and not wanting people to see my hearing aids and not wearing my hair up. Those are examples of how I was, hiding it, growing up. So it's not something that I would say people should lead with. It's until we break down those barriers and bring more of that comfort level of the uncomfortable and making it comfortable.
And I had the opportunity at the Clayton to attend one of your immersive empathy building workshops. So I think that's a great, what you just talked about in terms of the environment that we need to create so that people don't feel like they have to diminish that part of themselves to be an active participant. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the format of the workshops and also what they have led to in terms of changes from participants, because I think that correlation is really impactful to hear about.
Well, it was great to have you part of that immersive experience and for you to, kind of lead knowing the impact, and that's not just impact, that's life-changing impact. And that's what we do, is we create that experience and that feeling with leaders to come into the immersion and to be really open-minded. Each of these individuals are given a disability, a mobility impairment, a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, to kind of, live in that moment for that hour and a half, 90 minutes of understanding. They may not get the full scope of disability, but they will definitely, it'll heighten their experience of going, again, from that uncomfortable feeling to more comfortable and being more considerate and more, have more compassion and understanding to not only just disability, but to people of all differences, to, bring that perspective of saying, wow, it really is crossing over in so many different areas of discrimination in a work environment. That it becomes relatable to someone who may have a difference. So, that time is really important, and we give such focus on that feeling. We educate them on, the fact that this is a market that people can join at any given time in their life. I mean, it's the only demographic that pretty much speaks to all different audiences. And everybody's impacted by disability, whether if they're aging parent they're taken care of, or, if someone has an accident, or, somebody who comes into a hotel may come in from the outside and be coming from a skiing trip and they had an accident. I mean, it could be a permanent disability, it could be an invisible disability. And we try to show and share through the storytelling experiences, which kind of make it easier to understand. I think stories are powerful, and we show that there's success beyond disability, that we just don't focus on the, the stereotypes that we see in the media with disability, and not being afraid to talk to that person with a disability. I mean, you look at, you walk through cities and you see homeless people and you see them in a wheelchair and you see them holding a cup of change. We want to understand that that person in that chair should not be even afraid of their own opportunities of what they can accomplish. And that's what we do in our training and our events.
Yeah, it was so impactful. To when I participated, I was assigned a mobility impairment, so I was in a wheelchair. And so immediately as I tried to roll up to the table, there was a chair in the way. I couldn't reach the water in the middle of the table. I almost fell out of the wheelchair trying to reach the water because it was so far away. And then when we did the scavenger hunt throughout the space, there were doors that I could not open. There was a door where a table was jutting out into the doorway that I couldn't go through. And so it was a really tangible way to reinforce and kind of remind folks, whether they're in operations, whether they're planning events, whether they're helping to create the space in which a team operates, to think about what does accessibility really look like. And there are so many dimensions that a lot of us take for granted. And so that's one of the things that I really valued about the workshop.
Yeah. And, to your point, it affects every part of an organization. And that's what we share. That, if there's not, one only segment that we're targeting in an organization. It affects employment. It affects products and services. It affects people, relationships, clients, consumers. It hits every facet of a company. And that everybody can be a contributor, but they have to be a contributor. And I think by being a contributor and more aware is to have that feeling of empathy.
I completely agree with that. The intersection of the stories and the interactive component, I think, are so compelling. But as you think about the trajectory of your career and spaces or teams that you were a part of that did enable you and did feel like that accessible, welcoming space, can you think about the impact it had on you in terms of how you contributed, your feeling of sense of belonging and connection, what you saw as possible? Was there a tangible difference for you in that environment versus an environment where you didn't feel like that was a part of you that could be there?
It's interesting when you talk about, the tangible of it being the past, the present, and the future. So when we talk about what it was like for me in a corporate setting versus an entrepreneurial setting, I have always tried to surround myself with like-minded people who are about embracing and being empathetic. And unfortunately, it's just not how the world is. And that is a reality and a clear reality. And I think that is probably a key reason to why I believe the work I'm doing is so critical and so important to change the mindsets of leaders and everyday people in a work environment. I have had hurdles in corporate environments that have not been accommodating to my needs as far as my hearing disability, and some it's a fault of their own, and some it's going back to the covering of me not wanting to share and being in an environment that is a safe place. I think a lot of people sometimes with disabilities feel that if they disclose their disability, they may not be in a safe place, because if they're not able to hear and miss out, they feel like, oh my God, I might lose my job if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, or what I can do or cannot do. So I think it just being in more inclusive places where the sense of belonging is created. I think when you are more open, as I've seen in my career, about who you are and your identity, then and more people become more aware and then more understanding, and it only helps teams win and become successful. So when the nature of the environment that I am in had that good essence of the culture, it everyone benefits, and it's proven. And I've been part of amazing sales teams. I've been part of amazing companies. I've had great clients. But as I've gotten older, I think sharing more about who I am, you'd be surprised how many more people are paying attention and listening.
As we've seen, in some ways, a shift, and there's a lot of work to be done, but also in the way that you're engaging people and sharing your stories, that helps to drive that as well. And one of the things, as you were talking about people not disclosing because maybe it doesn't feel like a safe space. And when I think about what covering looked like for me as a young queer professional, I can look back and really identify it as something that constricted my ability to contribute to the team and to lead, and how connected I felt to people. It impacted, and in a sense, my creativity and my fulfillment in the work. And so I wonder if there are similarly, emotional or mental stressors or emotions or feelings that came up during those types of experiences, and then what can that lead to over time if the environment that you're in doesn't become a more accepting one?
I think for me, it was, how do I use my voice when I know I sound different? And I think, children and even young adults, and adults for that matter, will say, well, you sound weird. You sound different. Do you have a retainer in your mouth? Why do you talk like you have marbles in your mouth? You sound different. You sound like, open your mouth. And I'd be like, open my mouth. So there was a part of me that was timid and shy and afraid to speak. So my opinion wasn't valued because I was part of that problem, that I was afraid. And that fear was embedded in who I was, to be afraid to speak. And the irony now is, I have spent my whole entire life having to listen so hard and extra hard. And now I'm really using the power of my voice, because I know my voice, along with other voices, need to be heard. Um, so I see the paradigm shifting as a human, to be able to, use that voice. And I used my form of expression, as a child, through sports. And sports was a way for me to get that fear out on the field, because I knew I was a great athlete. And I love to be creative in art and design. And now I use that in another business I have, which is baskets. I do gift baskets, and I design very high-end, very creative baskets. So I think I've always found other outlets to express myself, um, through those experiences.
And what, remind me, it's escaping me at the moment, but what sports did you play?
So I was a soccer player, I was a basketball player, and I was a tennis player. So I had a sport for all seasons. Yes.
I played a lot of basketball when I was younger, but soccer I think I only made it a year. But those are great. Especially as a young person, you talk about the sports, you talk about the creativity. So you found some of those outlets that you could kind of live through. And then I can absolutely see how that then translates to what you're working on now, and even the media work that you've done around accessibility, and athletes, etc.
Yeah, I think, having sports and outlet for creativity, I think keeps some people out of trouble. And it definitely kept me grounded, and it kept me, focused, to have a drive. And I think that drive is something that, has been really powerful for me in my life, to keep on going and not to give up, and have that perseverance and, dedication to, not only teams, to, sport, to life, to friends, to appreciating everyone around me. That came from all of those outlets that I had.
As you look at, we talked about past, present, future. As you look at the future and your work through Ready or Not Media, what are some of the recommendations you have for leaders, for DEI professionals, for people who are wanting to make more inclusive, accessible spaces? What are some of the recommendations you would have for them?
I think leaders and people in general need to have an open mind, is where it starts. And the open mind is, be open to having a conversation, it all starts with a conversation. If we have a conversation about who we are as people, we are more alike than different. And that is really what my ask is that people take a moment and get out of that work space for a moment, because we're all humans and we all have feelings, and we could still be good at what we do, and we could still be good leaders. We still can make companies successful and profitable. But if we have more of the human side to who we are as individuals, then everything else is, it's going to unfold, and people are going to be successful as an organization and as people. I know that I would love leaders to look at the work I'm doing and give opportunities to not only myself, but to people with differences and challenges, to be looked at and seen and heard as individuals that have a part in society, and they can be contributors. That's what my ask is that, you know, everyone deserves a chance and an opportunity. We don't know what we don't know until we have that conversation. So let's have that conversation.
Yeah, and as we talk about chance and opportunity, as you look at the last few years with this expectation of being in the workplace being disrupted, these remote or hybrid opportunities being available, we saw a huge increase of employment for people with disabilities. And so it was an access, it wasn't a lack of talent, it wasn't a lack of ability, it was this access question of what are we expecting of people as part of the job that may not actually impact how well the job is done at all. And so it'll be really interesting to see, and I really hope that people are taking that into account as they consider what are the hiring practices, and as they're calling people back, quote unquote, into the workplace, how they take that into account.
And your point, Josh, about remote work, there were a lot of people who were being hired and doing their jobs really well outside of the offices. And these leaders didn't even know that they had a difference or a disability. And the work doesn't stop. Just because people were getting the remote access, it doesn't mean that we stop in the work environments where we're going to get people back to the offices and work, and people are going to be in each other's, you know, presence. And it's still very important that these leaders don't just assume because someone has worked remote, it's been successful. We still have a job to do, and bring them in the office and create an inclusive and diverse environment where people will feel comfortable coming into work. But it's also, how do we get to work? We need transportation, we need access to get us there. Without that, we can't go to the office. So it's work from all industries that we need to lead with accessibility and access and universal design, and create this environment that's inclusive for all.
You're absolutely right. There's the work of one, allowing people who can't make it in for whatever reason, geographic proximity could be one of them in, but also all of the internal work in the physical space, so that how do those things coexist, and how do you have that inclusion and accessibility across each. One of the questions that I've thought a lot about recently is this question of whose imagination are you working in, and what does it look like for each of us to imagine a future differently? And so I wonder how that question sits with you, and as you look at imagining the future of work or the future of accessibility, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
How do we make it the norm is what comes to mind for me. And I think until media shows all of the differences and forms of accessibility and creating universal design in media. I think that will help dictate the future. I think people learn a lot from social media. I think a lot of people learn a lot from television, radio, but most people learn by talking, and we've lost a lot of that because we're constantly looking at our phones and we're not having that communication. So I think the dialogue of those conversations need to be had in the environment that we surround ourselves in, whether it's personal, professional. We need to make it our job to have those conversations at the kitchen table and restaurants, and when we're out about and interacting on teams and participating in clubs. And we need to really make that a priority still. We all are humans, and we've all been gifted different ways to communicate. And how do we use those different ways of communicating to the best of our ability? I believe that kind of where I see it, where we make it part of the norm to communicate and express ourselves.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up how much technology has shifted how we communicate, how the stories are told, how we understand each other. And so that'll be a huge puzzle piece in this broader plan that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think the form of expression has been safer for some through technology. And sometimes it's hard because so much information is shared, and it has its positives and it has its negatives. But I think if we are smart, we can create the medium to make it accessible and comfortable and acceptable. I think those are the key components that will drive more unity and more sustainability in cultures and environments around the world.
Yeah. I agree. I think I'm excited to see, especially with the work you're doing and these different efforts, how we bring that forward and how we make that happen. So as we wrap up our conversation together today, is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to shout out or kind of share and contribute as part of this conversation?
I do want to shout out to leaders like yourself who are taking on the challenges of sharing the differences, but celebrating them. And I really think that we need to celebrate the diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility that we have made. And I think we still have a lot of work to do, but I commend those leaders that are taking on the challenges and the open minds and hearts to create those environments and create those cultures and sense of belonging. We have to start somewhere, right? And if we don't have that conversation, there's no point. So I encourage more leaders to join us to continue the momentum so we can do extraordinary things and be as exceptional as we are and continue to be.
I like that call to action. I think that's a perfect way to end our time. And I'm so grateful, Lori, that you made time to join me today and for the work that you're doing. Before I sign off, if people want to learn more about Ready or Not Media and about you, where can they find you?
Well, we can be found on Instagram at Ready or Not Media, and you could certainly find me on LinkedIn at Lori Frisher on LinkedIn, and our website is readyornotmedia.com. And, just reach out. We're happy to connect with more leaders like you and learn more about your organizations and how we could continue to create great case studies about how positive this work is. So I look forward to what's to come.
I do too. I can't wait to see you in person soon and to see how our work continues to intersect and impact communities. If listeners are interested in learning more about the topic of covering, delving into my Uncovering Your Value newsletter, or getting in touch to share your story or about public speaking, you can visit www.joshmiller.ventures or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find more episodes of the Inclusion Catalyst podcast at inclusioncatalyst.com. And I can't wait to see where this journey takes you all. I hope these conversations have inspired you to take bold steps to explore new frontiers and to create a more inclusive world through action. Until next time.